Hey, everyone. Welcome to the Platform Engineering Show. I'm your co-host, Alan Schimmel, CEO of TechStrong and PlatformEngineering.com. And let me introduce you to my co-host, Luca Galente, who's head of PlatformEngineering.org. So we got all the platform engineerings here for you. What's up, Luca? How are you?
I'm good, man. How are you doing?
I'm good. I see you're still in Morocco, enjoying that Mediterranean lifestyle. Good for you, man.
Yes. Goal is to show up at the Christmas dinner tent, and make everyone else jealous.
All right.
That's
Well, you should be. Well, I would tell you could come here and get tan, but our weather has been so miserable, I forgot what the sun looks like. We've just
Really?
had
In Florida?
rain and cloud. Yeah, it's been very rainy, very cloudy. It's supposed to go down into the 50s this weekend, which is pretty cold for here. Yeah, people are freaking out, busting out their coats.
You're like, I don't have the...
Oh my God, it's so cold. They're running to the stores, stocking up on water. It's crazy. Anyway, man, welcome. This is episode 2 of the Platform Engineering Show. If you missed the first one, it's available. It's available on TechStrong TV or YouTube or any of your favorite platforms of podcast platforms. I got platform on the brain. But any of your favorite podcast platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. In today's episode, Luca, what are we discussing?
So we're talking about the salary gap between platform engineers and DevOps engineers, where, how real that is, where that might come from, and what that might mean for where we're going as a space.
Absolutely. So I told you when we were talking off camera, I have some interesting views here.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised that platform engineers are making more money than DevOps engineers.
I think you saw this happen already once, right?
Yeah, well, but here's the deal. When I first started DevOps.com in 2014, there was a huge fight in the community, like people like Patrick Dubois and John Willis and, some of the early, Adam Clay Schaefer, some of the early people in DevOps who said there is no such thing as a DevOps engineer. That's a fallacy. But in spite of that, the markets kind of decided there was such a thing as a DevOps engineer, right? And it's funny, Luca, when I first started, to be a DevOps engineer, you had to know Chef, Puppet, or Ansible.
Right.
Maybe a little Jenkins. That's what a DevOps engineer. That was it. And so did that define a DevOps engineer, or did that define what DevOps teams do? No. But yet, it became one of the most popular jobs out there.
And where were most people coming from into the DevOps engineers ranks? We're like,
ops. They were
just
the ops people.
Just the ops people, right?
Yeah,
just rebranding to DevOps.
Yeah, back then, and the DevOps was a different world back then. Back then, the devs used to say, you know why I don't like DevOps? Too much ops. It's too ops-centric. And you talk to the ops people, and they say, you know why I don't like DevOps? Too dev-centric. Too much dev. And so sometimes that's the test of a good compromise when each side thinks the other side got a better
Complaining,
deal.
yeah.
But I'll be honest, I went to both sides of this argument, and I came to the conclusion that, no, there is no such thing as a DevOps engineer. That's a unicorn, a mythical creature. That really, there are DevOps teams that are cross-functional, that have security engineers and testing engineers and developers and, SREs and all of that stuff. So I think the jig's up. I think the market has come to the realization that what exactly is a DevOps engineer and why should we pay them? Now, I know a lot about DevOps engineers. I don't know a lot about platform engineers, though. So tell me why they're real and why you think that's got legs.
Yeah. I mean, we spoke about in the first episode last week, right, about the difference between platform engineers, DevOps engineers, this like product mindset, and how platform engineering evolved from DevOps, right? And I think that's really the key lens here to look at this as well, right? Because the way I think about it is this: what we were discussing is platform engineering is like this, industrialization, right, of how you basically build and deliver software. And this like DevOps approach works in smaller teams, in smaller settings, simpler tool chains, but it doesn't scale really well to like large enterprise, lots of people. And so once you get to that scale, then that's the key thing, right? It's really about recognizing, well, we do need separations of concerns. Like that's a good thing. We had Kelsey Hightower at PlatformCon 24 this year, and he did this like fireside chat with us. And he was saying, if you tell people silos are good, it's a really quick way to get a lot of people in our industry really mad, right? And it shouldn't be, right? That shouldn't be the case because silos are good. As long as you have the right, the right ways of communicating between things, right? And I think that was a very interesting insight for me last week from the conversation, right? Of how you framed it from like this historical perspective. DevOps was kind of like this like revolutionary swing towards like, hey, everybody needs to do everything and so on. And I think that's really like the frame of this conversation for me is like platform engineering is kind of like bringing back a little bit of silos, not to the extent where like, hey, we just throw over the fence the code and like we don't care about it. But you need some level of separation of concerns to be a productive engineer organization at a certain scale, right? If you're 10 people, great. Everybody knows everything. You can do DevOps, fantastic. If you are, 2,000 people, you just can't take the same approach.
Right.
Yeah, 10,000. And so that's really the thing. And then I think, to your point, what we're seeing is, and so I do think that the platform engineer role is more legitimate, if you will. And I hope people are not going to clip this than the DevOps engineer role, right? Because ultimately, to your point, like DevOps is a methodology, is a practice, is something that we do as a team. It shouldn't have been a role, right? That's just because the market evolved that way. Whereas platform engineer is a very specific role, and I think it's actually very important to define it precisely. Because one risk is that a very similar thing happens again, which is like, okay, now the DevOps engineers rebrand to platform engineers and they don't change anything, right? And they approach building a platform the same way they're used to, building and managing infrastructure, which is a one and done 6 months infrastructure project. That's not how you are supposed to build a platform. The platform is something that is a product. It has a life cycle of 5+ years in most enterprises. And so that's really how you should approach it as a product. And so that's one of the key differences between DevOps and platform engineers is this like product approach, product mindset. And so that means that you have a very differentiated role from, for example, I&O teams, right? Like infrastructure and operations teams, like you still need them, right? You need both. And then of course, in some companies, platform engineering becomes this, like I was just talking to like a large financial institution half an hour ago, where like platform engineering is like this huge umbrella term that has I&O teams, that has like cloud ops, that has SRE, that has everything underneath it. But whether, regardless of what your the end sort of like org structure looks like on your end, it's important that the platform team has its own sort of like mission and role, which is building a product, is not maintaining the infrastructure that product runs on, right? And so that's where, I&O teams are still necessary. That's where SREs are still necessary, right? It's not that like platform engineers replace any of these. It's more augment them and really bring that product perspective into the equation.
Yep. Few thoughts on that. First of all, I don't know if you're familiar. There's a show on Apple TV. It's in its 2nd season now. It's called Silo. Did you ever see this show or hear of it?
No, I haven't. No,
you should check it out. It's called Silo. So it's a sci-fi series, right? And the idea is something happened on Earth. The Earth is poisoned. Typical sci-fi stuff. The Earth is poison, toxic. And people live in a silo. Like there's a silo that goes way underground, and this like whole society lives within this silo, and the silo somehow filters the air, and it does, and it's 100 years or hundreds of years already, and people are just living in this silo. And then some woman did something wrong, and they exile her out of the silo to the wastelands. And she goes out there, and you know what she finds? Other silos. And so it turns out that there's all of these silos out there where humanity has survived, but they don't communicate
and they're not aware
with
of each other. That is funny.
Right.
Okay.
And so they don't, you know, one silo is all dead because a catastrophe happened or something, a virus outbreak. Another silo is doing really well. Another silo, not, people are starving. Where had they had,
you have all the different like branches, right? Basically,
right? Yeah, they're all like little petri dishes. But had they had communication, the whole would have been better, right? Maybe they could have reclaimed the earth or something by then. It's the same thing here, right? When you have silos, it's okay if you're a platform engineer and you're doing your job. You're not a developer. You're a platform engineer, and a developer is a developer. It's the communication that's the key. And that was really the part about dev. Like if you speak to Patrick Dubois and some of those folks, it was about the communication. It wasn't about the title. It wasn't about being a DevOps engineer. It wasn't about knowing everything. It was about the communication, working together, right? In sort of harmony, if you will, to accomplish the common goal. You said something last week too that I thought was really dead on, which was we can't expect developers to be responsible for building their own platforms, right? Think about it. That's like saying, hey, you want to live in this house, go build the house, then you could live in the house. That might have worked like, in the American West in the 1800s or something.
If it's a very simple house,
Yeah, right. And if it's a log cabin. But that's not the way modern software works, right? You can't tell someone, go build their own house and then you can live in the house.
Yeah, exactly.
People want to buy
this
houses.
This communication thing, I think, is super interesting, right? Because we spoke about this like product mindset as kind of like one of the key sort of differences between the, this like DevOps approach and like the platform approach. But and one thing that also always comes up is this also like communication thing, right? And I think it's very interesting. I think it speaks to the fact that like despite the original intentions, this communication focus was really lost in the DevOps world, right? Because now people are looking at platform engineering, and every time I say, one of the key skill sets of a platform engineer is communication, right? Why? Because you need to mediate between all the different, vested interests, basically, of all the different stakeholder groups. Like you need to make the developers happy. You need to make executives happy. You need to make the I&O teams, the security, the architects, everyone happy. You need to get everybody on board. And you need to be a really strong communicator to do that, because the way you speak to the value of the platform, to developers is completely different than when you do it to, executives. Like, developers are going to be about waiting times, and security teams is going to be like enforcing compliance automatically. Executives are going to be about time to market. If you talk to developers about time to market, they're not going to care, right? So, so that's why you need to be a really strong communicator. But I think what's very interesting, based on what you just said, is this, right? That like people are very like, every time I say this, people are like, yes, everybody just like nods and is like, wow, yeah, like, as if it's like a revolutionary concept, right? Like, except like it was the same thing in DevOps, to your point. It's just that it got lost.
Yeah, it got pushed to the side, with this whole, with people wanting, hire DevOps engineers, frankly, right? Where the real DevOps people knew that a DevOps engineer was kind of a squishy thing at best. But let's talk about platform engineers, Europe versus North America for a second, right?
Yeah.
I mean, yes, the U.S. or North America, meaning Mexico, Canada as well. I mean, generally, it's a bigger market than, let's say, the EU market. But There's usually a little parity. I know in like developers, software developers, yeah, you get big discrepancies, let's say between Eastern Europe and Western Europe, Northern Europe, Southern Europe. We have it in the U.S. too. A platform engineer or a developer in the Bay Area in San Francisco makes a lot more than one, in Atlanta, let's say, right? Atlanta has relatively lower level. But is there a big discrepancy in salaries, but still between EU and North America for that?
Yeah. So we ran this survey across hundreds of platform teams and even more individual contributors, because we both asked DevOps and platform engineers, how much you make. And the numbers are considerably lower. I wish I could show the slide. Maybe we can show it later, but or link it
maybe
somewhere.
We could put a link to what we should do is put a link to the whole report where people can download it.
So State of Platform Engineering Report, Volume 3, you can download it on platformengineering.org. But the, what we've seen is there is a probably like a 30-40% gap between sort of like North America and Europe, both in platform engineer and DevOps. Yeah. And then, so for example, consistent. So for example, the baseline for Europe on platform engineer is 120 grand, and it's about like 100 for DevOps. On platform engineer is almost 200 grand on platform engineers for North America, and for DevOps is 150 for in Europe, right? So platform engineers is higher on both, so about like 20-30% higher than DevOps engineers. And then North America is higher on both of those numbers. And this is, by the way, I don't know if you've seen like lately. There's a lot of like on X. There's a lot of people like posting this this delta that developed between like Europe and the United States. Because to your point, well, actually, Europe is technically a bigger internal market, right? Because they have. Right. Like it's like 500 million consumers instead of like 300 something. But
130, yep.
Yeah, but if you look at like post GFC, right, the Great Financial Crisis in 08, like they completely diverged. Like up until there, in the 90s and so on, we're kind of like Europe and US were like growing at a similar pace. US was always a little bit higher, but not that much. Since then, basically Europe flatlined. And then, US has gone vertical in the last 10 to 15 years. So it's super interesting to see. And then people kind of like always, in these threads, like break it down in terms of like, even if you look at like really like, I think IT workers, software engineers, it's so much, the delta is huge, right? Like we're talking, I was just talking to like a really good product team actually in the platform engineering space in Portugal. They are pre-seed, probably like 2 million, something that they raised. And they have like 15 engineers since like a year, right? Like this would be impossible to do in like New York, right?
You couldn't do it.
Like,
yeah.
No way. And so I think like, so in some sense, it's not a bad thing, right? Because from a startup cost perspective, it's easier, but broadly, definitely you can see there's like a big gap. And I mean, Europe is being smoked right now. We're really just being left behind.
Well, so I read this whole series of books by a guy named Thomas Friedman who writes for the New York Times. The whole, I don't know if you ever heard The World is Flat is a book he wrote, and then he wrote, It's a Flat Hot World, and it's flat this and that. My thought is, especially when we're talking Western Europe, right? It's not the Stone Age there. There is technologically advanced, I think, as most of the U.S. And that's what I'd love to see the numbers. Like, is it maybe that platform engineering is a relatively new discipline? And so most of the platform engineers are based like in the Bay Area or New York and Boston, where, you got to make $200K just to live. Right? $200K is not living high on the hog
geo
in New
bias,
York.
right? The geo-distribution bias. Yeah, that's interesting.
Right. But what's a platform engineer in Dallas making, or Atlanta, or Charlotte, or Miami, or where cost of living is a little less than New York or Boston or San Francisco, and And maybe there's just more platform engineers concentrated there because they're more tech savvy. They're more advanced technologically. You don't have, I mean, heck, I'm trying to get a social media person down here in South Florida who has B2B and tech industry experience, and I can't find one. I
Really?
can't find one because they're not. Well, I can
There's
find
no
plenty of
industry there.
social media people. There's no
Yeah.
tech.
Mhm.
Yeah, I've got plenty of social
Interesting.
media people applying who have done makeup companies, real estate
Yeah.
companies, financial advisors, all kinds of crazy stuff like this, but not in the tech space because they're not here.
Right.
And supposedly Florida is getting very tech, like Miami. They want to do Silicon Beach, and they're doing all these things.
Mm,
But we don't have that community that you have in New York or Boston or San
the
Francisco
DNA.
or Austin, right? And I wonder if that's not part of it. But the other thing from the flat Earth stuff is, look, if it's that much cheaper to go to Portugal and get a platform engineering team, and I'm a startup guy, and I say, okay, I need a platform engineering team. I could do it in Portugal for half the price.
Yeah.
I'm going to do it in Portugal for half the price. I got to be stupid not to, right?
Yeah.
It's the whole reason why India has an IT industry, because it was half the price or less,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
to get engineers
And that's
there.
happening, right? Like if you look at like Eastern Europe, like there's a huge, and it's interesting because while to your point earlier, I think it was mostly just like, okay, Western Europe more expensive, which is higher in Eastern Europe. I see now a lot of actually US based companies just hiring in Europe and Eastern Europe because, it becomes like, as everybody becomes, more used to the whole remote thing. It's like, of course, like, why wouldn't I do that? Or even Canada. I mean, even Canada, you're like up in Canada from like the West Coast is already a lot cheaper than if you're in SF, right?
Sure.
So for sure. But I think like on the Europe side of things, what's, the problem is also just like, we said like, okay, well, this is this large internal market, but actually it's not true because you need to like relocalize every time your product, your services, whatever you do, not just from a language perspective, but from a regulation perspective. And it's really like regulation that's killing it, right?
So that's a whole nother episode we should do, which is, especially with the new administration coming in here in the U.S. and, the government in Germany just had a no confidence vote and got right wingers in Italy. And, is the world entering, I grew up in we should have no trade barriers. It's a small world after all.
Mm.
And, and we should, and then that's the best thing for everyone, right? Bring American style, American lifestyle to the whole world. Let everyone be consumers. And that would be good for everyone. I don't know if it turned out to be so good for everyone, but the bottom line is like free trade, right? Let the best country win. Let the best engineers win. If it's cheaper in Portugal, do it in Portugal. But now we're entering, I think, another era where people are putting up tariffs and barriers, and it has to be made here and supplied. It's under chain security. We're going to make sure we have the ability to make our own chips here and make our own silicon here and make our own. Yeah. I don't know. And it's not the U.S., especially with this new administration, you're going to see a lot of that. I think you're also going to start seeing it in Europe too. Right?
Yeah.
Walls.
Probably. We tend to follow, right? So it's interesting. Yeah. Going back to the silos.
You know what? I think it's actually been in the year, and this move to the right has been in Europe. I think U.S. is a little later to it, right? If you look, I mean, well, UK went the other way. UK has a Labour government now, but I mean, you go to Greece, you go to Italy, you look at what's going on in Germany now. Even in Israel, which, is kind of EMEA. And I mean, these are right-wing governments that free trade isn't their calling card. It's protect our industry.
100%.
And so I think the whole world's doing that. The whole world's going this way. And what does that mean for us? Like I said, that's a whole nother episode
It's
we
a
could
lot of
talk
topic, but it's
about.
very interesting, a game theory perspective as well. Like with that, because
Yeah,
like if one starts, then the other one goes. Like it's interesting thing.
it for tat.
Yeah, exactly.
It for tat.
Exactly.
You know, what did I say? China just launched this week the first. So basically, you know, Elon Musk's satellite, the internet. I forget the name of it now. His internet
Starlink.
provider is
I have one.
Starlink. China. Yeah. So China is launching their own Starlink. They want to put 14,000.
I didn't know.
Yeah, they just sent the first batch up this week. Now, they didn't do a lot of publicity around it, probably because they copied some copyrighted stuff or whatever. Who knows with them? But, you know, they're, you know, so now you're going to have competing satellites, and it's going to be interesting times over the next 10, 20 years, I think, as kind of the world kind of readjusts. Oh, yeah. So platform engineering salary, what about compared to developers?
Yeah, we got astray a little bit. So, you know, like in general, I think I have an interesting data point here, because we asked people also just like how senior they are in this survey, which I think was very interesting. And this will kind of explain, right? Like the gap between between platform engineers and developers is pretty high, and the reason is that, you know, platform engineering ultimately is not an entry job, right? Whereas developers, it could, you know, normally it is, right? It's where you start, and then you're a junior developer, and then you go up. Yeah. And, you know, so we were breaking it down. So out of the hundreds of people that we asked, only like less than 5% has less than 2 years experience. 15% has 3 to 5 years experience. 34% has 6 to 10 years experience. 18% has 11 to 15, and 28% has over 16 years experience, right? So like, you know, if you look at this, basically something like 80% is at least above six years.
Or more years.
Yeah. And then basically half of them is more than 10 years, right? So that tells you a lot.
So how do you grow new platforms? So this raises an interesting question. There's a gap there.
Yeah.
Right?
There's a huge gap.
How do you grow new platform engineers, right? Because getting them to that 6-year mark is hard, right? This is the old, you know, I want to get my first job. Well, you got to have experience before we could give you a first job.
Yeah.
It's a catch-22. You know, how do you overcome that? Or is that like a cliff we got to worry about?
No, I think that's a great question. This is super interesting, right? Because also, and the point that's in the report is like right after that is then you look at the average age of the platform teams, and obviously it's way younger, right? So, you know, it's like 10% is 0 to 6 months, you know, over half is like under 2 years, right? And only like 10% is over 5 years. So what that tells you is like these people, of course, are, you know, they have a lot of experience. They don't necessarily have a lot of experience as platform engineers. Yeah, they're recycled, right? So from DevOps, from other cloud ops, SRE, other things. And so I think to your point, to your question, right? Like how, like there's definitely a shortage right now, I think, in the market. I wouldn't say the shortage is necessarily in people that are able technically to build a platform. I think the shortage is in people that think with this product mindset, right? And an actual, like, you know, product managers for platforms, there's a huge shortage. Like I see it, whether it's on our products pipelines, whether it's on, you know, general companies that I consult with, you know, even the very large, you know, people that I partner with, like ThoughtWorks and like, you know, very large providers, they even have a shortage internally, right? So they have like all this like pipeline. There's a lot of demand in general, I think, in the market for platform engineering. There's just not enough, and there's enough technical people that can build a platform. There's not enough product people that can actually drive the, like, you know, good platforms basically, and not platforms that nobody adopts or that they're actually missing the point, right? And so I think the solution there is twofold. One is just more education for everybody, right? This is why we rolled out the courses and the trainings, and it's really about like raising all boats at the same time, because, you know, you made a point earlier of this like DevOps engineers, this like, you know, unicorn. I also think this like technical platform product manager is maybe not a unicorn,
Also
but very close to
mythical.
it, right? Yeah, it's very,
Yeah.
very hard to do this, right? Like, how can you be like technical enough to, spar with, people that have 16 years experience building these things, but at the same time have the soft skills to, communicate with like very, high level with, very senior executives, because these are very large companies, but also like low level developers, and figure out what they want. Like, I mean, this is just like, and then
That's a
and then
very
what you see
unique
is like,
skill set.
yeah, and you have very few of these people. And then what you see is enterprises, when they recognize this talent, they're like, no, 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 no. You're not going to work on an internal facing product. You're going to work on an external facing product. So I'm not going to put you in the internal developer platform team, right? And so that's where the shortage comes from. And I think I think for me is, yes, we need to train more of these people and build them up. But I think it's the short-term solution, short to mid-term solution, is actually take all this like existing people that have a lot of experience and make sure that they adopt some basic understanding of this with this product mindset, right? You don't need to become like a super proficient, technical product manager. You just need to, understand, hey, what is platform engineering? Why are we doing this? And like, who are our customers? Our customers are developers, right? You just need to have a bit more, switch a little bit that's really customer centric focus and product centric focus when you build your platform. And I think that's going to get us 80% of the way there.
Agreed. Hey, as long as we're getting stuff off our chest, I got another type of engineer I want to ask your opinion on. And that is the so-called full stack engineer. So is there really such a thing as a full stack engineer? Have full stack engineers become platform engineers? Was there ever such thing as a full stack engineer? God knows they were hiring enough of them, right? And they were paying them good money. But what's your view on full stack engineers?
Well, I think it's from my perspective, it's just interesting to see this industry, just how for how much developers say they hate marketing, how quickly they fall into marketing things. And I think like full stack is just like another example of this, right? It's like the same thing of like people that created DevOps said, hey, there shouldn't be a DevOps engineer, and then everybody falls into the DevOps engineer thing, right? And it's just like I think it's all these titles. I was listening to this podcast like a few months ago, where this guy was basically running growth at Facebook back in the days, and he was saying, we needed data scientists, except because we had a lot of data to analyze all this thing. Except data scientist wasn't a thing; they created it, right? Before it was called some sort of business analyst, like something that sounded boring, basically, right? And they're like, no, I need these PhDs, right? That, and I'm going to pay them a lot of money. But the problem is, if you package this as like, a business analyst, nobody's going to come, right? And so they were like, oh, they all come from like physics and things, like they like the science thing. So I just call it data science. They literally, that's why, and now you have like, all this curricula in universities of like data science, but like the actual data science thing was invented by Facebook as a hiring tactic, basically.
To make it sound sexy. It's marketing.
To make it sound sexy. And so like, a physics PhD would go and like become a data scientist because it's cool. And they paid you a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's like, this is a bit of the same thing, right? Where like somebody just figured out, I had the same thing. At some point I had to hire somebody for growth as well. And I had this like demand generation lead, and I was getting really bad applications. And then at some point I just put like head of growth. And then like all of a sudden, it's like all this like small tweaks that you make. And so maybe there's one for your social media manager.
Full stack.
Full stack.
Yeah, for my I've thought about how do I make that social media thing sexy. That's a whole nother story. Yeah. Anyway,
hey, look, I think it's just about people
time.
making it sexy.
Yeah, it's marketing, my friend.
Yeah, it's marketing.
We're out of time. Hey, we'll be. This is our last show for 2024. Our next one will be 2025. We also have some webinars or roundtables around the Platform
in
Engineering
January.
Show coming up in January. We will be publishing all of that, I guess, in our social, if I could get a social media person, we'll be publishing all that in our social media stuff. But this has been a great conversation, man. Enjoy Morocco. Have a happy Merry Christmas, Luca, and a Happy New Year. And to everyone watching or listening to this, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year to you as well. And we'll be back in 2025. We're just getting started with the Platform Engineering Show.
Yes,
Take care,
thank you.
Luca.
Happy holidays. Merry Christmas, everybody. Thank you, Alan. Bye-bye.
All righty. Bye-bye.